There are stories you think you know, etched into the bedrock of memory, whispered in the husks of ancient prayers. They are the cornerstones of our world, the first light, the first man, the first sin. We hold them up as simple truths, as moral fables painted in stark shades of black and white, good and evil. But history, true history, is never so simple. The oldest stories are the deepest, and the deepest places are always the darkest. What if I told you that the first sinner never died? That the first murderer still walks among us, a silent phantom haunting the corridors of time itself? What if the punishment for his crime wasn't a simple curse, but the wellspring from which all the things that haunt our nightmares first crawled into the world? This is not a story you will find in any holy book. This is the chronicle of the shadows that bleed from its pages. This is the legacy of the man who was first among the fallen. Welcome to the Bible Weaver, Mysteries and Lost Relics. What you are about to hear is a journey into the unwritten history of our world. It is a story of regret that spans millennia, of a secret war fought in the alleys and boardrooms of our modern cities, and of a truth so profound it could shatter the very foundations of your faith. So I invite you to listen closely and question everything you think you know about the beginning of sin, because the beginning never ended. It began, as all true tragedies do, with a silence. It was the silence that fell after the wet, heavy sound of rock striking flesh and bone, the terrible final silence when a brother's last breath escapes his lips, not as a word but as a faint, surprised hiss, and then vanishes into the empty air. It was the silence of creation itself holding its breath, the sun seeming to pause in its journey across the sky, the wind ceasing its whisper through the first fields of green wheat. All of existence seemed to stop, to bear witness to a crime so new it had no name: murder. Cain stood over the crumpled form of his brother, Abel. The stone, heavy and jagged in his hand a moment ago, now lay inert in the grass, stained with the first blood spilled in fraternal strife. The rage, that hot, blinding furnace that had consumed him, that had screamed at the injustice of a favored offering, of a love he felt was denied him, that rage was gone. In its place, a cold, hollowing dread began to pool in his stomach. The blood on his hands was not just a stain, it was a severance. He had cut something fundamental in the fabric of the world, and he knew, with a certainty that was more terrifying than any sound, that he could never, ever mend it. He looked at Abel's peaceful face, the face he had known since birth, and for the first time, he understood the concept of gone. Abel was not sleeping. He was not resting. He was absent, an emptiness where life used to be. The silence pressed in on Cain, a physical weight. And then he came, not in a whirlwind of fire, not with the clap of thunder. His arrival was a shift in the very pressure of the air, a sudden, crushing weight on Cain's soul. The voice was not a sound that traveled to his ears. It was a resonance that bloomed in the center of his being, a question that was also an accusation. Where is Abel, your brother? And Cain, a boy in the body of a man, terrified and cornered by the author of his own existence, spoke the first lie in defense of the first murder. His voice was a raw, broken thing. I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? The lie hung in the air, a pathetic, transparent shield against an omniscient gaze. The response was not anger. It was a terrible cosmic sorrow. What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. The punishment was not death. Death would have been a mercy. Death was an ending. For Cain, there would be no ending. The punishment was life. A searing heat, colder than any ice, erupted on his forehead. It was not a brand of fire that burned the skin, but a mark of soul fire that seared his very essence. It was a sigil of separation, a glyph of loneliness, a declaration. This one is mine. You are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. The voice echoed within him. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. A wanderer, a fugitive, forever. Cain cried out, a raw animal sound of terror and despair. My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. The final terrible mercy was then bestowed. Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And so it was said. He could not find peace in the soil. He could not find solace in the sight of God. He could not even find release in the finality of death. He was condemned to walk, to watch the sun rise and set on a world that was no longer truly his, to watch civilizations bloom like desert flowers from the dust and then wither and die, to watch mountains crumble and rivers change their course, to watch every face he ever knew, every friend, every lover, every child, grow old and turn to dust while he remained unchanged. Cain, the first sinner, the first wanderer, became the first immortal, and the mark on his soul became a magnet for the darkness within man, a beacon for the echoes of his own first terrible sin. Elias Vance believed in history. He believed in the tangible truth of things, in the brittle texture of ancient papyrus, the cool, solid weight of a clay tablet, the faint, dusty smell of a forgotten tomb. History, for him, was a science, a meticulous process of uncovering, cataloging, and understanding the past through the artifacts it left behind. It was a shield against the chaos of myth and the seductive whispers of superstition. At 26, he was the youngest curator the Atherton Museum of Antiquities had ever employed, a prodigy in the field of Proto-Sumerian linguistics. He could read the faded cuneiform on a 4,000-year-old receipt for barley as easily as most people could read a morning newspaper. He found comfort in the order of the past, in the clear linear progression of empires and alphabets. That was before the night his parents died. He had been in London presenting a paper at the British Museum. The call had come at 3 in the morning, a clipped professional voice from the Chicago PD. A home invasion, they'd said. A robbery gone wrong. But when Elias flew home and finally saw the police report, the real one, not the sanitized version given to the press, the orderly, rational world he had built for himself shattered into a million pieces. The report spoke of things that didn't belong in his world of scientific history. It spoke of doors ripped from their hinges as if they were paper, of furniture thrown with impossible force, of a cold spot in the center of the living room that lingered for hours, defying the laws of thermodynamics. And the coroner's private notes, the ones a sympathetic detective had let him glimpse out of a mixture of pity and confusion, spoke of the bodies. His parents hadn't just been killed, they had been emptied, left as dry, weightless husks, their faces frozen in expressions not of pain but of a profound and soul-crushing despair. The official case went cold within a month. But for Elias, the real investigation had just begun. He quit his job at the museum, sold his apartment, and poured every cent he had and every ounce of his academic rigor into the abyss that had swallowed his family. He chased whispers, followed fringe theories, and dove headfirst into the world he had once disdained. The world of the occult, of forbidden history. He learned that the past was not a neat, linear progression. It was a dark and tangled forest, filled with things that had no name in his scientific lexicon. It was in a dusty, forgotten bookstore in Prague that he found the first real clue, a leather-bound codex that spoke of an ancient society, a fellowship of watchmen who guarded the world against the echoes of the first sin, the order of the first witness. They found him 2 weeks later in a cheap motel room in New Orleans. They didn't break down his door. A man in a simple, well-tailored gray suit simply knocked. His name was Gideon, and his face was a roadmap of scars and ancient sorrows. He didn't carry a badge or a gun. He carried a truth that was far heavier. He told Elias that his parents hadn't been killed by a person. They had been fed upon by a creature, a thing born from the residual sorrow of the world, a lacriphage, a grief-eater, an echo of Cain. Gideon offered Elias not revenge, but knowledge, a place in the war his parents had been casualties of. And so, Elias Vance, the historian, traded the quiet, dusty halls of the museum for a place far older, far deeper. The scriptorium, the hidden heart of the Order of the First Witness, was located 200 feet beneath the Gothic spires of the University of Chicago's Divinity School. It wasn't a bunker or a barracks. It was a library, a vast circular chamber whose walls were lined with books and scrolls from every era of human history. It smelled of old paper, beeswax, and the faint, sharp scent of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. This was the Order's true arsenal: knowledge. They were not crusaders or inquisitors. They were librarians, historians, and watchmen. Their motto was carved in ancient Hebrew above the central archway: "We watch the shadow, lest it consume the light." For 3 years, Elias trained. He learned that history, as he knew it, was a lie, a carefully curated narrative that omitted the monstrous truth. He learned that the creatures of myth and legend, the things that went bump in the night, were not fantasies. They were a form of spiritual pollution, the echoes left behind by the unending, tormented existence of Cain. The Order's doctrine was clear and absolute. The mark placed upon Cain was not just a brand of protection, it was a font of corruption. Cain himself, they believed, was a mindless, wandering beast, the first monster. His path across the globe, a scar of supernatural misery. In the wake of his passing, in places where his own immense, immortal despair had fled, the fabric of reality would weaken. And from the psychic residue of his sorrow, his rage, his regret, new things would crawl into existence. The echoes, a lacriphage, like the one that killed his parents, was born from a surge of Cain's bottomless grief. A creature of pure predatory hunger, a berserker, might be spawned from a flash of his ancient murderous rage. Those echoes were not his children. They were his psychic tumors, given monstrous form. They were cancers on the soul of the world. And the Order's job was to be the surgeons. They tracked these echoes, studied their nature, and when necessary, they excised them. Quietly, efficiently, erased them from the world before they could spread. They never hunted Cain himself. The scripture was clear. His life was sacrosanct, protected by a divine edict of sevenfold vengeance. He was a force of nature to be weathered, not a beast to be slain. Elias absorbed it all, his analytical mind finding a strange new order in this terrifying new reality. He excelled at research, at connecting the dots, at seeing the patterns in the chaos. He could trace the potential emergence of a creature by cross-referencing ancient texts with modern police reports and seismic activity charts. But the field work, the excisions, that was another matter. His first real mission was a disaster. It was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance. A series of strange disappearances in the old meatpacking district of Chicago. The victims were all homeless, forgotten people. The kind of statistical noise that rarely makes the evening news. But the pattern was there. No bodies. Just small localized cold spots and a faint, lingering scent of ozone. The order's sensors flagged it as a potential nascent echo, a weak, newly formed entity. Gideon assigned Elias to go with a senior field agent, a woman named Kaskia, a pragmatic ex-Mossad operative whose faith was in her silver-etched knives, in the stopping power of a .45 caliber bullet. "You're the brain, kid," she told him as they drove through the rain-slicked streets. Her voice a low, gravelly hum. "I'm the muscle. You stay in the car. You watch the energy readings on this tablet. You tell me what the ghost in the machine is doing. If you see me running, you don't wait. You just drive. Got it?" Elias nodded, his throat dry. The car was a nondescript black sedan, but he knew that beneath its ordinary frame, it was an armored vehicle, its trunk filled with an arsenal of weapons that blended ancient metallurgy with modern technology. They parked in a derelict alleyway that smelled of rust and decay. The building was a brick and steel carcass, a former slaughterhouse. The tablet in Elias's hands flickered to life. A map of the building overlaid with a faint pulsing blue light that was concentrated in the sub-basement. "There it is," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible. "The energy signature is stable, but deep, very deep." Kaskia checked her sidearm, the click of the safety echoing in the small space. "Deep is good. Means it's not planning on going for a walk. Stay here, brainiac." She slipped out of the car, a ghost in the rain, and disappeared into the gaping maw of the building. For 20 minutes, Elias watched the blue light on the tablet. It pulsed gently, like a sleeping heart. He watched the rain trace paths down the windshield. He tried to control his breathing. He felt 1,000 miles away from the quiet, predictable world of Sumerian clay tablets. Then, the light on the tablet turned from blue to a violent, angry crimson. It didn't just pulse, it spiked, a jagged line that shot off the top of the screen. A moment later, a sound reached him, a low, guttural roar that wasn't human, that wasn't animal. It was a sound of pure, ripping hatred, and it was followed by the sharp, distinct crack of Kaskia's handgun. One shot, two, a third, and then silence. Elias's training screamed at him. "Drive. Get away. Report back." But the image of his parents' empty forms flashed in his mind. He couldn't. He wouldn't. He grabbed the heavy silver-plated shotgun from the rack between the seats, a weapon they called the Absolver, and burst out of the car. The inside of the slaughterhouse was a labyrinth of rusted hooks and decaying machinery. The air was thick with the coppery smell of old blood and the electric tang of ozone. He followed the signs of struggle, fresh gouges in the concrete, spent shell casings gleaming on the floor. he found Saskia at the edge of a vast dark pit that led down into the sub-basement, the abattoir's old drainage cistern. She was alive, barely. Her leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and a deep, three-clawed gash ran from her shoulder to her hip. She was pressing a field dressing against the wound, her face pale with shock and pain. "I told you to drive," she hissed, gritting her teeth. "What was it?" Elias asked, his hands trembling as he held the shotgun. "Not nascent," she coughed, a trickle of blood at the corner of her mouth. "Old, very old, and smart. It wasn't born from rage. It was born from pride, a tyrant echo. It thinks this ruin is its kingdom." From the darkness of the pit below, the roar came again, closer this time. A wave of psychic pressure washed over them, a feeling of absolute crushing arrogance. A voice, not of sound, but of pure thought, slammed into Elias's mind. "Mine. It's coming back," Saskia said, trying to push herself up. "Once it's trophy. You have to go, Elias. That's an order." Elias looked at her, then at the pit. His fear was a cold, solid thing in his gut. But something else was there too, the quiet, stubborn resolve of the historian. The need to see, to understand, to document. He wasn't a warrior, but he was a witness. He helped Saskia to her feet, slinging her arm over his shoulder. "The order doesn't leave its own behind," he said, the words sounding braver than he felt. They began the slow, agonizing retreat back towards the entrance. The creature was behind them. He could hear the scrape of claws on concrete, the heavy, guttural breathing. He didn't dare look back. They burst out into the alleyway just as the hulking form of the tyrant echo smashed through the brick wall behind them. It was a nightmare of sinew and bone, taller than a man, with skin the color of old bruises. Its body was a twisted parody of the human form. Its arms were too long, ending in claws of jagged obsidian-like bone. Its face was a featureless mask of smooth skin, except for a wide, gaping maw filled with needle-sharp teeth. But its most terrifying feature was the symbol that glowed with a faint, sickly light on its chest. A twisted, warped version of a glyph Elias had seen in the oldest Sumerian texts. The glyph for king. He shoved Saskia into the passenger seat of the car and turned, raising the absolver. The shotgun felt like a cannon in his hands. The creature lunged, its roar deafening. Elias pulled the trigger. The blast was immense. The silver-laced buckshot slammed into the creature's chest, and it shrieked, a sound of pain and outrage. It staggered back, but it wasn't dead. Not even close. It glared at him, or where its eyes should have been, and the voice in his head screamed with fury. "Trespasser, you will be unmade." Elias fumbled to chamber another round. He knew he wouldn't have time. The creature gathered itself to charge again, its claws digging into the asphalt. And then, something impossible happened. A man stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the alley. He was of average height, dressed in simple dark clothing, a long coat, a plain shirt. He moved with a quiet, unhurried grace that seemed utterly out of place in the middle of this monstrous confrontation. He looked ordinary, except for the eyes. His eyes seemed to hold the weight of centuries, filled with a weariness so profound it was almost a physical force. The tyrant echo froze. It turned its featureless face towards the newcomer. The psychic roar of arrogance in Elias's mind was suddenly replaced by a new feeling, a feeling emanating from the monster, a primal, instinctual terror. The man took another slow step forward. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke in a calm, almost gentle tone, but his words carried an authority that vibrated in the very air. "This is not your kingdom," the man said. "It is merely your cage." The creature let out a low, guttural whine. It took a hesitant step back. The man raised a single hand, and Elias saw it. On the back of the man's hand, for a fleeting second, a mark seemed to glow with a faint inner light, a complex ancient sigil that made the warped glyph on the monster's chest look like a child's crude imitation. It was a mark of absolute, primordial authority. "You are an echo," the man continued, his voice laced with an ancient sadness, "and you have overstepped. Go back to the silence that spawned you." The tyrant echo shrieked, not in rage this time, but in what sounded like agony. Its form began to waver, to lose cohesion, like a statue made of smoke. It seemed to fold in on itself, the glow on its chest sputtering out. With a final, silent implosion, the creature dissolved into a shower of the black dust and a lingering smell of ozone. And the alley was quiet again, save for the sound of the rain. Elias stood frozen, the shotgun hanging forgotten in his hands. The man looked at him. His ancient, weary eyes met Elias's, and for a moment, Elias felt as though his entire life, his parents, his studies, his grief, was being seen, understood, and catalogued by a mind that was older than history itself. The man gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then, he turned and melted back into the shadows from which he had come. He was gone. The debriefing with Gideon was tense. Kaskia was in the scriptorium's infirmary, stable but in for a long recovery. Elias stood before the Order's leader in his vast circular office, the silence broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock that was rumored to have once belonged to Isaac Newton. Elias recounted the events precisely, factually, as a historian would. The nature of the echo, Kaskia's injury, their retreat, the creature's appearance in the alley. He told him everything, except for the man. He didn't know why he held that part back. It was an instinct, a gut feeling that what he had witnessed was something the Order's rigid doctrine could not and would not accommodate. He simply said that the creature, wounded by the shotgun blast, had unexpectedly destabilized and dissipated. It was a weak explanation, and he knew it. Gideon stared at him, his pale blue eyes like chips of ice. An echo of that age and classification does not simply dissipate, Mr. Vance. It was wounded. It should have retreated to heal, or it should have become more frenzied. Your report is incomplete. "It's what I saw, sir," Elias said, his voice steady. Gideon leaned forward, his hands stippled on his ancient oak desk. "The Order values truth above all things, but we also value loyalty. Kaskia's report, when she is able to give it, will be cross-referenced with yours. I trust there will be no discrepancies." It was a quiet, cold threat. Elias was dismissed. For the next 3 weeks, he buried himself in the scriptorium's archives, a man possessed. He wasn't researching tyrant echoes. He was hunting for a ghost, a man with ancient eyes and a glowing mark on his hand. He pored over reports of echo encounters from the last 50 years in Chicago, looking for any anomaly, any mention of an outside party, an unknown variable. He found nothing. He expanded his search. Global reports, centuries of data. He cross-referenced sightings of powerful, unclassified entities with local folklore and eyewitness accounts that had been dismissed as unreliable. He slept for 2 hours a night, living on stale coffee and a burning, obsessive need to understand what he had seen. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. He was analyzing the energy signature from the alley, captured by the car's sensors. The dissipation of the tyrant echo wasn't a gradual fading, it was an instantaneous collapse. The creature's energy hadn't just vanished, it had been cancelled out, neutralized by an energy signature that was its polar opposite. The echo signature was chaotic, loud, a jagged scream of energy. This other signature was a perfect, silent, complex waveform, a signal of immense power held in perfect absolute control. And it had a familiar resonance. He pulled up the data from his parents' murder scene. There, beneath the chaotic signature of the lacryphage, was another fainter signal, a ghost in the data, the same silent, complex waveform. It had appeared moments after the lacryphage's energy had peaked and had faded away within minutes. He wasn't an avenging angel. He was a janitor, a cleaner. He was following the echoes. Elias's hands trembled. This changed everything. The Order's foundational belief that Cain was a mindless beast, a wandering font of corruption, was wrong. Cain wasn't a beast. He was a man, a thinking, acting individual who was not just creating these echoes, but was, for some reason, also unmaking them. He wasn't a storm. He was the eye of the storm. But why? Why this quiet, secret war against his own legacy? Elias needed a location. He analyzed the waveform, treating it like a linguistic problem. It wasn't just energy, it was information. He ran it through every decryption algorithm the Order possessed. Nothing. It was too old, too complex. It wasn't code, it was a language, the language of a soul. So he stopped trying to decrypt it. He started looking for where it was strongest, where the signal was broadcasting from. He created a program to triangulate the source of every faint instance of the signal he could find in the city's archives over the last century. The data points were few and far between, but a pattern began to emerge. A single, consistent point of origin. A quiet, forgotten neighborhood on the city's south side. A place of old brick buildings and forgotten factories. He knew what he had to do. This was a line he could not uncross. To go outside the Order, to act on his own, was the greatest heresy. It meant expulsion, or worse. But history had taught him one thing. The greatest discoveries are always found in the places you are forbidden to look. He took one of the Order's unmarked vehicles, a simple service van, and drove out of the university's subterranean garage. The city lights of Chicago painted the night sky in a hazy orange glow. He was heading into the oldest part of the city, into the territory of a man who was older than the city, older than the nation, older than civilization itself. He was going to find Cain. The address the triangulation had led him to was not a dark castle or a blood-stained temple. It was a clock shop, a small, unassuming storefront tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The sign above the door was old and faded, the gold leaf lettering barely visible. AC Horologium, timepieces repaired. Elias parked across the street, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He watched the shop for an hour. A few people went in and out. An old woman with a broken cuckoo clock, a young man picking up a restored wristwatch. It was utterly, terrifyingly normal. He had to be sure. He took a deep breath, got out of the van, and crossed the street. The small bell above the door chimed as he entered. The inside of the shop was a world out of time. Thousands of clocks covered every available surface, their ticking a soft, chorus-like symphony. Grandfather clocks stood like silent sentinels along the walls. Cuckoo clocks, mantle clocks, pocket watches under glass domes. The air smelled of brass, oil, and old wood. And behind a long wooden counter, a man was hunched over a workbench, a jeweler's loop screwed into his eye, his long, delicate fingers manipulating the impossibly tiny gears of an antique pocket watch. It was him, the man from the alley. He looked up as Elias entered, his ancient, weary eyes meeting Elias's. He showed no surprise. He simply removed the loop from his eye and placed it gently on the counter. "You are a long way from the scriptorium, historian," the man said, his voice the same calm, resonant tone Elias remembered. Elias's blood ran cold. "How do you know who I am?" The man gestured vaguely at the ticking clocks around them. "Time tells me many things, and your organization has a particular scent, old paper and self-righteous certainty. Please, call me Adam. It is a name I am fond of for ironic reasons." Elias swallowed, his hand inching instinctively towards the concealed handgun beneath his jacket. "There's no need for that," Adam said, his eyes flicking down to the spot and then back to Elias's face. "If I wished you harm, it would have ceased to be before the bell on that door stopped ringing. You are here with questions, so ask them." Elias took a hesitant step forward. "The creature, the tyrant echo, you destroyed it." "I corrected it," Adam corrected him gently. "It was an imbalance. I restored the balance." "And my parents," Elias's voice was barely a whisper. "The Lacryphoge, you were there." Adam's gaze softened, and for a moment, the immense weariness in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of something else, a shared, profound grief. "I was too late. The echoes, they are born of my passions, my regrets. Sometimes they manifest too quickly. I am not omniscient, Elias Vance. I am merely persistent. I clean up the messes I make. The Order believes you are a monster," Elias said, the words feeling foolish as he spoke them. "A mindless beast." A dry, mirthless smile touched Adam's lips. "The Order of the First Witness. Yes, they have been watching my shadow for a very long time. It is easier for them to hunt monsters than to confront the man who casts the shadow. It gives them purpose, a war to fight. They have no idea that the war is not against me. It is within me, every single second of every single day." He picked up the pocket watch he had been working on, its silver case gleaming in the dim light. "Do you know what time is, historian? For you, it is a river, carrying you from a beginning to an end. For me, it is an ocean. I do not move through it. I simply exist in it. I have watched this world form and break and reform 1,000 times. I have seen empires rise from a single spoken word and fall because of a single misplaced stone." He snapped the watch case shut. "And through it all, there is the mark." He held up his hand, and the faint, intricate sigil glowed for a moment in the dim light. "Your Order thinks this is a curse, a font of corruption. They are not entirely wrong, but it is so much more than that." He leaned against the counter, his ancient eyes locking onto Elias's. "The mark is a tether. It binds me to this world, to the very soil that drank my brother's blood. It is a constant, unending connection to humanity. I feel it all, Elias. Every surge of rage that leads a man to violence, every wave of grief that drowns a grieving mother, every spike of pride that topples a king. Those are my passions, the passions of my children, amplified, echoing through the generations. And sometimes, the echo becomes so loud, so concentrated, it takes on a life of its own." He gestured around the shop. "This place, these clocks, They are my therapy. 1,000 tiny orderly heartbeats. A reminder that even in chaos there is a pattern, a rhythm. It helps me focus. It helps me keep my own storms in check. But I am not perfect. I fail. And when I fail, things like the lacrophage are born. Elias felt his entire worldview tilting on its axis. The neat, orderly history he had clung to, even the revised, monstrous history of the order, was dissolving. This was something far more complex, far more tragic. So you hunt them, Elias said. You hunt your own mistakes. I don't hunt, Adam replied, his voice soft but firm. Hunting implies a chase. I'm already there. The echo and I are connected. I am the stone, and they are the ripples in the pond. When a ripple grows too large, I simply still the water. It is my penance, my responsibility, a futile attempt to keep the ledger of my sin from overflowing. Suddenly, the bell on the door chimed again. A young couple walked in, laughing, holding a small broken music box. Adam's entire demeanor shifted. The ancient cosmic being vanished, replaced by a gentle, unassuming shopkeeper. "Ah, good afternoon," he said, his voice warm and friendly. "How can I help you?" Elias stood in the corner, forgotten, as Adam charmed the couple, examined their music box with genuine care, and promised to have it fixed by the following week. He was a perfect chameleon. He had lived so long he could wear any face, play any part. As the couple left, Adam turned back to Elias. "They are the reason, you see," he said quietly. "That small moment of shared joy over a broken thing, that is the light that the shadow threatens to consume. It is the only thing worth fighting for." A small, insistent beeping sound came from a device on Adam's workbench. He glanced at it, and a flicker of his ancient weariness returned. "Another one," he sighed. "A small one. A surge of greed and envy in the financial district. An avarice sprite. It will start by shorting stocks and end by eating the broker's soul. I should go." He began to take off his work apron. "You have a choice to make, Elias Vance," he said, not looking at him. "You can go back to your scriptorium. You can give Gideon your incomplete report. You can continue to hunt the ripples, pretending you do not know the nature of the stone. Or you can seek to understand the water itself, but be warned. To do so is to invite a sorrow you cannot possibly imagine." He walked to the back of the shop and disappeared through a curtained doorway. Elias was left alone with the ticking of 1,000 clocks, each one measuring a second of a life that had no end. He stood there for a long time. The choice Adam had laid before him was stark: loyalty to the order, to the only family he had left, to the clear, simple war of light versus dark, or loyalty to a truth that was far more complex, a truth embodied by a man who was both the world's greatest sinner and its most diligent secret guardian. He thought of Kaskia, lying in the infirmary, her life nearly ended by a creature born of this man's ancient pain. He thought of his parents, their lives extinguished by another. And yet, he thought of the look in Adam's eyes, a look of grief that dwarfed his own 1,000,000 times over. He walked out of the clock shop, the bell chiming his departure. The street was the same. The city was the same. But the world was irrevocably different. He got back into the van, his mind racing. He had found Cain, and the truth was, not a weapon he could use. It was a burden he would have to carry. As he drove back towards the university, his phone buzzed. It was a text from a secure encrypted number, a number he didn't recognize. He opened it. The message contained only a single line of text. "The tyrant echo in the slaughterhouse. It was not my failure. It was drawn there. Something new is stirring in your city, historian. Something that feeds not on my echoes, but on their power. Be careful who you trust. Elias stared at the message, a new, cold dread seeping into his bones. He had thought he had found the bottom of the rabbit hole. He was just now realizing it was a bottomless pit. He had found Cain, the first sinner, the source of the world's supernatural woes. But what if there was something else out there in the darkness? Something even older. Something that hunted the hunters? He thought of Gideon's cold, probing eyes. He thought of the order's rigid, unshakable dogma. Be careful who you trust. The war wasn't as simple as he had been taught. He was no longer just a watchman. He was a man caught in the middle, a historian who had stumbled into the secret, living heart of the world's first and greatest story. And he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the next chapter was about to be written in blood.